Hi, it's Dia. Today I'm going to take polychromos pencils and I'm going to start with this white bunny image from the BUNS and do a basic fur demo. When I first started doing this, I thought that I was going to just lighten up the white a bit. No, not lighten up. Darken up. That's the wrong word too. I was going to make the white fur more furry, I guess would be the word. And then you'll see that things changed a little bit. So I started out covering the entire bunny. You're only seeing the head right now with cold gray. And I just wanted to leave that as a base because the more layers that you put on for fur, the better. So as you can see also, although it is kind of quick, it's okay. I did everything not perfectly at all, and that's okay with fur because you're going over it and over it and over it. And I just want to clarify, that was actually cold gray 2, and then once I did all of the bunny with the cold gray 2, I went a little darker with cold gray 3 in the shadowy areas. So that's how I started it all. Then I went to cold gray 5, which is even darker, and I started to not quite shadow, but put some uh, put some shadowy areas on the bunny's face where you would see some detail. You know, because the bunny's face isn't flat; it's not perfectly round. So where I'm putting these shadows would be areas where the face would be a little indented. There is an area under the eyes which is a little shadowy. Maybe the fur's a little bit darker. It's nice to have many different colors in the fur. It makes it look more realistic. And yes, it's very time consuming, but it does come out really nice. Now, right around the pink area of the ear, you could see that I left a white perimeter, and that's actually relatively realistic. That's kind of what you would see, and we will go over it with some individual hairs later, but for now I'm just going to leave it as it is. Now I'm going over the whole thing with some warm grays. This is warm gray 2. Once again, I'm not being very neat, and once again that's fine. I'm pushing a little bit harder here because I'm starting to get the idea in my head that this bunny is not going to stay white. I mentioned before that I thought the bunny was going to stay white, and I I can't say that I instantly knew what this was going to end up like. And this is one of those examples where this drawing kind of took a life of its own. Now, that color that I just used is brown ochre. And I figured the snout, the very front of the bunny, the front of the bunny's nose would be like would be slightly more reddish, and then I decided that I would put some of the red through the bunny, even though at that point I thought he was going to be a gray bunny. But then all of a sudden I remembered those bunnies from when I was a kid, and they would be hopping around my front lawn just being so adorable. Then I realized that's what I wanted this bunny to be, that sort of wheat colored gray, almost like tree bark colored bunny. And right about here is where I decided that's what I was going to do. So I started to go over him with a little bit warmer colors rather than just making him a straight gray bunny. Although this is a warm gray. This is warm gray 2 again. Um, I would incorporate the warm grays with the ochres and the very warm, almost leaning toward orangey burnt ochres, and eventually Indian red, and my favorite named polychromos pencil, I think it's called Caput Mortuum. Now I started to take the brown ochre, and as you can see, the point is not very sharp. I used the same point as I did for when I colored in that area. I'm making little tiny lines. And now I took warm gray 3 and I started to make not very light, but relatively light indications of fur. Now, what I wanted to tell you about fur is that all fur doesn't grow in the same direction. And if you want to look it up, that's exactly what I had to do when I first started to draw, because if you draw all the fur in the same direction, it starts to look like a pattern, and it looks odd, and sometimes it looks flat, and you start to get things happening that you don't want happening. So look it up, look up how to, no, not even how to draw. I would just look up, close up of a bunny, and or whatever animal that you happen to be drawing, in this case a bunny, and look to see where the fur is growing. Now you can see this is much faster than normal, but to leave this in full time would be a very, very long video. So you can get the idea. Now around the eyes, it's very interesting because the hairs kind of grow in a curved shape, and you can see what I was doing there. Now around the perimeter of the face and on top of his head, you don't want to make the fur, I mean, unless he's black, you don't want to make the fur too dark and too even, because then it starts to look like harsh, bristly fur. If you want it to look soft around the edges, use a softer, lighter color. Now I'm starting to use raw umber. And I want to tell you something about the area very close to the nose and around the snout and the mouth. The hairs right around the nose and right around that lighter colored, warmer area, those hairs would be very, very short. And you want to make the indications of the fur there very, very tiny. You almost don't want it to look like fur. They almost look like little dots, because if it looks too much like lines coming out of that burnt ochre area, it will look like it'll look like a fur explosion, and it won't look natural. So, very tiny dots around that area. Now I'm taking that same color, the brown ochre, and going around the eyes, and I'm putting some mixed in various areas on the top of his head, on top of his nose, and the area also on top of his nose will be very very short, meaning the hairs will be very short. You can see as I get a little bit more away from the nose, the indications of fur, the individual's hairs get a bit longer. I'm darkening up the area even under his nose too, because the less he becomes a white bunny, the more things change. I found this process to be really interesting. I thought I was going to keep his eyes pink because I thought he was so cute as a pink-eyed bunny, but that was when he was white. So this is one of those cases also where it's definitely changing. So I added some, what is that color? That's the cold gray 5 around the eyes, and that's a very sharp pencil, and I'm making individual hairs more apparent here. So I'm starting that process where there's enough layers down that I can start to draw individual hairs. You don't want to go too dark yet because you don't want them to look like a Brillo pad or a bristle brush. It might feel like I'm all over the place as I draw, but to me, it's a method to keep the balance of the picture. If I think a shadow should be someplace, then all of a sudden that area looks too dark, I look on the other side or even what's adjacent to it and see if that same color might fit there. Now, I'm I'm coloring in, well, not really coloring, but I'm making hairs, individual darker hairs on the edges of the ears. Now you can see where I left that white rim around the pink. I'm making the hairs go toward the inside of the ear and toward the outside of the ear. So they're going in all different directions. Now, they're always growing up and out, but some are going in and some are going out, meaning left and right. Now I'm going to keep going back and forth with this same color for quite a while, making very tiny hairs around the nose and the mouth area, almost like dots. Oh, and what I'm doing now, there's little darker dots and they almost look black, and that's where the whiskers grow. So I I put the first indications of those little black areas under the nose. Now you can push with different pressures and get a very different result from the same pencil. So you can see at this point that he looks very different from the white bunny that he started out as at the beginning of this video. And I thought for a moment right here that I would just leave him, and I think he's very pretty here, but then I figured let's just take it further so I can show you what it would actually take to make this bunny darker. So I decided to make the left side of his cheek a little puffy looking, so it looks like he's got a mouthful of flowers and he might be chewing. Now this is where I'm making some of the outside fur. It's in that lighter color, the burnt ochre, so it doesn't look too bristly. I'm adding some of that throughout his face to make him look more realistic. His nose to me looked a little bit light here, and I was kind of going back and forth once again. Meaning back and forth, should I leave it light? Should I make it darker? And I really didn't have a set idea in my head quite yet about what his nose was going to look like. But the more I added color to it that wasn't pink, the more I liked him without the pink. This is the Cold Gray 5 again. I'm making some of these hairs a little bit longer and a little bit darker. It's a very sharp point because I do want some of those hairs to be defined. Now, if I wasn't filming, I would be moving the paper because, and okay, most of the time when you're drawing hair, the hairs are going in one direction. So where you put the pencil down first is usually the biggest part of the hair, meaning it's the widest. So if you put the pencil down and then stroke upward, where the pencil lifts off is the lightest part. So you kind of have to keep that going. You don't want to go in the other direction because then it looks like the hair is growing in the other direction, even though the hairs might be parallel. So I would switch it around because it's easier for me to draw many lines as I'm doing it toward myself. What I'm doing right here is the pencil is stroking away, and that's a little bit harder for me. So I would flip it upside down and I would be able to do it much quicker if I wasn't filming. And I'm telling you this because that might be easier for you too, to move the paper around, to even turn the paper upside down in certain areas. But you have to keep checking to make sure you're getting the shadows and the darker areas where you want them to be. Now I'm giving the eyes a little more detail here with black, and this is going to be my obviously darkest color of hairs. So I'm drawing the longer hairs in the darkest color. I'm enhancing the eye over here, making it a little rounder, enhancing the eyelashes. And you have to be a little bit more careful as you get darker, meaning as you use darker colors, because those are harder to fix. I'm darkening those areas where the whiskers grow. Pulling some of those hairs in toward the center of the ear. The black is interesting because you can use it for individual hairs and you could also use it for shading. Now you can see that I'm not trying to be perfect here. In fact, I'm trying to not be perfect, because if it's too even, it starts to look a little fake. You want the coat to look like it's rippling a little bit. There's some reflection somewhere. Sometimes the fur clumps up a little bit. I like the way the eyes look with the darker hairs around it. And then I was wondering about here what the eyes would look like if they weren't pink. Going back to the burnt ochre, I went back and forth many times, as you can see. I like the look of the warmer area by his mouth, but to me it wasn't warm enough yet. So I got some Indian red and I added that extra shape around his nose And I added some of that almost red color throughout his fur also. Much more around his mouth. And it added a really nice depth and punch to the fur color. I'm adding some black fur underneath his mouth. And as you can see, I just keep going back and forth and adding at this point. You can see right about here that I'm leaving a little bit of his cheek area a little bit lighter, so it looks like it's a little puffed out to give the impression that he's chewing on that flower. Now I'm making some more hairs with warm gray 5. And at this point, I'm starting to like the way he looks as a wild kind of outdoor bunny. So here I took the burnt ochre and I decided I'm going over the pink. It was a little bit too faded for me, or it didn't quite go with what I had in my head. Now that doesn't always work out either, but in this case I wanted to give it a whirl. So I'm going over the whole area a little bit at a time. As you can see, I'm a little tentative. I was kind of going back and forth. Then I got a little braver and I went in with the Indian red and the Caput mortuum and started to make that area even more, not quite bold, but more deep and, in my opinion, a little bit more interesting. Now also what was happening in this, the eyes seemed a little spooky, a little laser-ish. So as I was going here with the black and making the underneath part of the nose a little more intense and making those little tiny dots of hair around the perimeter and above the nose, those eyes were starting to they were starting to stare at me. And then I started to think, maybe those eyes shouldn't stay pink like I thought before. Adding some more of that Indian red into the rest of the fur. And then I decide, you know what, let's just go for it. Let's see what happens. So the white highlights were, I can't remember, it was either a Posca or it was a Signo gel pen, so I just went around it as much as I could. And as soon as I made those eyes black, I thought to myself, I can make even more of the fur more intense, a little more shadowy, and I was really happy that I went over the eyes with black. Now for the next few minutes here, I'm going over the whole face, adding more intense, very thin black hairs. If you hear a little music in the background, there's a recording session here also going on downstairs. So now I'm adding some whiskers that are coming directly out of those darker little dots in that snout area. I start exactly on one of the dots and just pull down very, very quickly in an arc. Then I'm just adding more and more fur. So as you can see, drawing fur is very time consuming but worth it. So I colored in the area underneath his chin with the same colors as I did on his face, the cold grays and the warm grays. And now I'm drawing some more fur, just like I would do on his face. And I'm at the black color at this point. I'm doing a little blending here, adding some more shading, and I'm mixing between just drawing and making hairs, meaning drawing like just regular circles. Now I'm adding the final touches, more of those little teeny weeny hairs that are almost not hairs, they're almost like dots around his nose. And I'm adding a little bit of gray on the interior part of his ears, just for some depth and interest. And after I was done, I looked at it and I could even go darker with the pink and the gray. And I don't know if you're like me, but I could literally draw the same picture or color the same picture forever. It feels like it's almost never done. And like I've said 100 times before, if you don't like your picture, it probably isn't done. So just keep going. So that's about it for fur part 1. I will finish the rest of his body to show you what you can do with the rest of him to make it more interesting. I hope you like this video. Oh, here's a close-up version. I hope you like this video. I hope you subscribe to me and even hit that little bell button so you won't miss any of my videos. Thank you for joining me. I hope you like the book The Buns, and I will see you soon. Thank you so much. Bye.